Hello, everybody. So we have a very challenging subject, which is war and peace in the Middle East. What role for the Europeans? It's very challenging because the Europeans played a big role, of course, in reshaping, after the victory of the British and the French in the First World War, the reshaping of the Ottoman Empire. And in the San Remo conference, America was not there. So they divided the Middle East. But since '56, the failure of the Suez expedition, the Europeans, the mainly concerned Europeans, the French and the British, were quite absent of the Middle East. They came back a little bit with the Madrid conference, a little bit. And yes, for the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, you know the say, the Americans are paying for the bombs, for the Israeli bombs. UN is paying for the food, and EU is paying for the reconstruction. But that was so now. To talk about this matter and war and peace in the Middle East, it's not only Israeli-Palestinians, but it's also maybe Turks and Kurds through Julani in Syria. It can be also a war, of course, between Israel and Iran. When I met Netanyahu in his office 1 month ago, he told me that no way that Iran will be never nuclear. You have a war in Sudan between you know, the army and the border security forces of Emirates. We have a problem with the Houthis in Yemen. So to answer this very challenging question, what can be the role of the Europeans? We will ask questions, very quick questions. To first, Mohammad Baharoon is kind of our host here. He's from Dubai. He's the General Director of the Dubai Public Policy Research Center, and before that he founded Bussola, so he was before specialized on the, if I understood, the relationship between the Emirates and the GCC, Gulf Cooperation Council. We have Marc. Marc is Deputy General Director of Ifri. Ifri, you know that Thierry is the president of Ifri, so Marc is a deputy director, and he has wrote a book on the 20 years war, which is started, you know, in 2001, 2021. He's a renowned specialist of terrorism in France, among other things, and we have Volker, who is a senior distinguished fellow of the German Institute for International and Security Affairs, which is the biggest think tank, foreign policy think tank in Europe. And he used to be a United Nations Deputy Secretary General, and he was a special envoy or representative, whatever, for Sudan. And Sudan is still at war today. So first, very quick question, Mohammad. We have a new situation in Syria. How not only the Emirates, but also the other countries of the GCC that you know very well, how do they see the situation? Are they a little bit upset? We understand that it's a big win by Turkey, but are they upset or not at all?
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much for having me here again. look, we look at the world as risk or opportunity. The difference between the two, risk comes to you, opportunity, you have to go to it. So I think in Syria, this is a moment where we all need to work towards an opportunity. And it would be our fault to let, let's say, differences get in the way as it did after the Arab Spring. So I think this is the way the UAE see that there isn't a possible opportunity for a risk. There's a possible opportunity for something much better. And maybe this is the time we need to work together towards investing in statehood of Syria. Regardless who is there, we need a Syrian state. And I think there is the time. Dismay at Turkey? I don't think so. Dismay at Iran? I don't think so. There is a major opportunity that we might turn the needle away from the conflicts. We have very positive signs, but we're also considering the history. I would say that, yes, keep the trajectory of history in the back of your mind, but also realize that many things has changed, including for us in the UAE. We're not pursuing policy in the same way we did 20 years ago. And I'm sure in other places, including Turkey, including Iran and others, are not pursuing policies in the same way. So maybe that is the opportunity we need to work for.
J'espère que vous entendez tous bien, parce que sur la scène, on ne s'entend pas très bien. Vous entendez tous bien dans la salle, au moins? Bon, bah alors ça marche. Ça marche pour la salle, en tout cas. Volker, you come from a country who has welcomed so many Syrian refugees. This was a Merkel policy in 2015. How do you see the role that could have in the future Europe, your country first, Germany, and then Europe, in helping the situation to kind of stabilization in Syria?
Well, thanks a lot, Renaud, and thanks to Thierry and his wonderful team for having us here again. Syria indeed has been my preoccupation for a long time of my academic life, at least, and the Germans have, as you rightly said, got to know many Syrians, and I'm quite astonished about my own country, how, and other European countries, how only a few days after the fall of the Bashar regime, a discussion has started about how do we get rid of the Syrians, how do we send them back. Now, I know that the large majority of the Syrians who came to Germany and to other European countries for good reasons, because their towns had been bombed and chemical weapons had been used against them, the large majority of them have integrated rather well. So it's a very insane, it's a stupid discussion, and if we were to send them home, or the majority of them home, we would miss a lot of people in the service industry, we would lose researchers, we would lose medical doctors, we would lose architects and engineers and construction workers, and I really don't know what we would do without them. But of course, once Syrians decide on their own free will to come back, we need to support them, and it's a real resource. It's a resource that can establish links and good links between the societies, Syrian society and the European society. So it will be to our benefit that in 2015, 2016, we had opened our doors, despite the domestic discussions we had after that. I think on Syria, actually we Europeans do have a role. On Palestine, Israel, unfortunately, it is very limited. It is not limited because there is nothing to do. It is limited because we Europeans don't have a common agenda. I mean, we know what we want. We want a two-state solution. We want peace between the Israelis and the Palestinians, but we cannot even agree as members of the European Union to cast the same vote in the United Nations General Assembly. So we are neutralizing one another rather than actually bringing our forces, our strengths, our resources together. I think on Syria it's different. And particularly since President-elect Trump already has tweeted in his very special way that we have no dog in that fight and we are not interested in Syria and it's an unfriendly country in the first place, I think the responsibility to support Syria actually does fall to its Arab neighborhood and to the Europeans together. And I see 5 points here if we want to devise an agenda or a strategy. I mean, besides getting to know the new guys in Damascus, we know some of them through the humanitarian organizations that have been working in Idlib. And most of the humanitarians who have been working with Hayat Tahrir al-Sham in Idlib have been astonished how professional these guys were. I mean, you know, you have 2 million inhabitants, original inhabitants in Idlib, you have 2 million refugees, and you have to give them identity cards, you have to make sure that that support gets to the right people, all that. So they have been very efficient. So maybe that's a good sign for hope. The other good sign for hope is that Ahmad Shara and the people around him, those are people from the cities of Syria, and if you ever have lived in the city of Syria and you want to rule Syria, you know you cannot have a very narrow ideological agenda. Syria is so much of a societal mosaic that if you want to rule Syria, you have to respect and accept the societal realities, which is that you have Sunni Muslims and Sunni Kurds, and you have Alawites and Druze and Ismailis and Christians, of course. So I think they know it. Now, for Europe, aside from getting to know these people, it is first, I think, for us and the Arabs and everybody else who wants to help, to support a UN-supported but Syrian-owned political process to get an all-encompassing, inclusive political setup, governance setup in Syria, including a constitutional discussion. In addition to that, and it's sometimes overlooked, I think, I do think that the new people in Syria do need help in a transitional justice process in order to avoid bloody revenge. So here's the United Nations, some European countries, some countries from Africa actually have a lot of experience that should be channeled into Syria. Then there is reconstruction. Of course, this country has been down, has been let down, and it is down. And I guess as Europeans, together with American friends and others in the international community, we have to start by lifting the sanctions, which sometimes is legally more difficult than slapping sanctions on a country. But these sanctions are still there, and they would be an obstacle to reconstruction. So we have to work on the reconstruction part. There will be European money and European expertise and Arab money and Arab expertise. The Syrians are the experts, so we will make use of the expat of the diaspora community, but first we have to lift the sanctions, and that's legal work that the Europeans have to do. And then we have to work on and with our NATO partner, Turkey. That, again, is a European task, I think. We do understand what the strategic interests of Turkey are. They may be a little bit, well, at odds with one another. On the one hand, they want stability in Syria in order to allow Syrian refugees from Turkey to come back to Syria. On the other hand, they have a conflict with the Kurdish organizations, and they want their allies in Syria to fight the Syrian Kurds. So I think it needs to weigh in, to lean on our Turkish NATO partners a bit to decide for the stability part and not for fighting the Kurds there. And my last point is, and that is actually where I started and where you asked me, is we need to make sure that the enormous capacities which Syria has through its expert community is used in order to rebuild that country. And that would be a case, but also a resource, as I said, for Syrian-European cooperation.
Thank you very much. And Marc, how do you see the role of Europe in Syria, but also in other matters, in stabilizing? Europe had quite a role with, it started with Catherine Ashton. She negotiated with Iran in Kazakhstan and so on, and the whole to lower the tension between Israel and Iran. So how do you see, what are the trumps and the weaknesses of European diplomacy to deal with the Middle East?
Okay, thank you, Renaud, for this question. You're quite representative of the region. It's a region with conflicting rules and norms. We have the WPC rule, 6 minutes per speaker, but you said, don't abide by this norm. So there's the Renaud Girard norm and rule. It's 2 minutes to start, plus the strategic surprise with the unexpected question. So let me just say 4 short things to begin and launch the conversation. First, as Volker also mentioned, Europeans are really divided, especially on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. So for instance, 12 members of the EU have recognized a Palestinian state, including 3 recently, Slovenia, Ireland, and Spain, and the rest, the 15 others, have not. So that's an example. Even within EU's institutions, you see the divisions. So now we have a new commission, but if you took the previous one, between the president of the commission and the high representative, you could see that there were different lines and different takes on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, but also on the broader region. So that's the first point. The second point is that for years we've heard, especially again on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, that Europe was a payer but not a player. It means that the influence has been waning over the past 3 decades. It was a harsh statement, not totally wrong, but that can be nuanced, because Europe indeed paid for a number of infrastructures that were later destroyed by the Israeli Defense Forces in different occasions. But Europe also tried to be a player. And for instance, it did try to launch a real state-building project in the Palestinian territories. We had, for instance, a mission to try and build a police force in the Palestinian territories. We also had EU BAM mission for the management of the border. So there are still elements that remain from these efforts, but in general, it's true that it failed. I mean, we don't have a state so far, and we can try and analyze the different responsibilities, but the end result is here. We don't have a state, and these state-building efforts have failed. The third thing that I want to say is that it's a tricky issue for several European countries to deal with this region because there are domestic consequences. It's true in Germany with these refugees, but not only the refugees, there are also domestic political forces that are very much involved in this issue. It's true in France. We also have our lot of demonstrations and tensions and polarization. It's true outside of the EU in the UK, where, by the way, the demonstrations were much, much bigger than in France and Germany. So policy makers in the different countries have to take that into account. And then to end on a positive note, I would say that the Europeans, that divisions can also be understood and seen as a diversification with different clouds in different areas and different countries, if you want to see the sunny side of the coin. But let's say that we still have some economic clout. We saw it in the first, actually, presentation of the WPC on the first day, with many countries in the region that still have the EU in general as the main economic partner. We still have some kind of diplomatic clout. And for instance, France was involved in the recent ceasefire deal in Lebanon, even though you know, it can be discussed, of course, but it still exists a little bit. And we still have even a military presence in different countries, including in Lebanon with UNIFIL. I mean, there are still 1,000 Italians there, 800 French soldiers, almost 600 Spaniards, 400
But they never
Irish.
stopped one missile of Hezbollah going to Israel.
Then the problem is the mandate. But the presence is there. You can still reinforce the mandate. I mean, it would take a lot of diplomacy again to reach that. But I think we should not be only negative on the waning influence of Europe and try to build on what's left and what still exists.
So very good answer for an unexpected question, and with hope on top of that. But I would insist, Mohammad, I would ask you, because you have seen, you know, Oslo Agreement was signed in Washington. Abraham Accords were signed in Washington. Reconciliation between Saudi Arabia and Iran has been signed in Beijing. So my question is, has Europe definitely missed the train or not? Can Europe run after the train? Or?
There is no one train. I mean, the region, unfortunately, is brimming with conflict, so many trains for Europe. But if I go from Oslo to Stockholm, what are the main train stops that we've seen from Europe? The one thing the region possibly looks up to Europe is that huge experiment with the Marshall Project in Germany. Nothing similar to it anywhere in the region. You know, with all due respect to the attempt to help the Palestinians in capacity building, but there's nothing similar to the... so I think until now, Europe is dealing with the region with the old toolbox that are fit for an analog phone, not to a digital phone. So we need to bring back the economic aspect into this, and I think there is a lot to be done, and again, Syria is one place. I think the second thing is that Europe needs to play the role of the facilitator rather than the role of the polarizer. And by that I mean, you don't expect, you know, if I'm going to support Palestine or Syria or other, they will have to adapt to all of the norms of Europe. We need to have other people work with it. It's not a problem if China is going to support the de-escalation, or Russia is going to hit the de-escalation, or India or whoever. You need more people on the bump rather than thinking that this belongs to us. This is something that needs to be done based on our rules. And again, the US has been always in the region, but I think we have a problem with follow-up. That was the problem with Oslo. That was the problem with Stockholm. That's even the problem with the Abrahamic Accords. We haven't seen a very strong leadership from the US to follow up on this, making it happen, make the basis on which it was done still maintain its value. So we will need that type of thing. And I'm intrigued by your reference to UNIFIL not stopping a single missile, because the French Navy was around Lebanon and it never stopped one missile coming from Israel to Lebanon. So again, this is an idea of how do we maintain statehood and maintain integrity of a state. How can we build it and make it an internal? Because that's the biggest problem we're going to face in the region, between a state, a nation state, and between a nation. A nation goes across states, and that's what the nation of, this is what the Muslim Brotherhood wanted to do. This is what Iran with its Shiism wanted to do. This is, even what Al-Qaeda and ISIS wanted to do. But we need to establish the role of a nation state with its border and its relationship to other nation states. And I think this is exactly what we wanted from Syria under Bashar al-Assad. This is exactly what we want from Syria under, the new leadership.
I would like to come back to the Israeli-Iran tension. So I said that, Catherine Ashton in Astana, she launched some kind of negotiation with Iran, and then the Americans with Obama joined. And there was a big result with the 14th of July 2015 Vienna Agreement on Iran nuclear program. All went right. The International Agency of Vienna checked that Iran was fulfilling its obligations. And then Trump comes, withdraws from the accord that had been changed into a UN resolution. He withdraws. And the Europeans were unable to make the agreement go. The French and the Germans, they tried. It's a very complicated thing called in-text. I'm not going to enter into details, but they tried because they wanted to go on with this Vienna Accord, but they were not able to. The pressure on German and French companies from American Treasury was too great. So is there, Volker, is there any role for us left in trying to prevent a war between Israel and Iran, or we have to leave everything, to Trump and Elon Musk, because we know that Elon Musk went to see the Iranian UN ambassador to maybe prepare a big bargain with Iran. I don't know. What is your assessment on that, Volker, please?
Look, thanks for the question. I think it's actually two questions. So one is, if you have two parties that are intent on confrontation, they will probably not ask the Europeans for advice. So if Israel or an Israeli government decides against all good advice, including good advice from the White House, to attack Iran big scale in order to destroy their nuclear program or the regime, the Europeans will have basically no means to prevent it. But preventive diplomacy starts before. And the GCPOA, or POA, or what you call the Vienna Accord, which was the first step to it, of course, was, and I would still commend it, it was a great achievement in preventive diplomacy, and it could have worked. It was a first step. There was a regional dimension mission, which the regional dimension was missing, which we were criticized for from the Gulf countries, and probably rightly so, but it was an enormously important first step, and the Iranians were prepared to comply with it. The Iranians didn't call it off. As you rightly said, it was the Trump administration, Trump 1, who unsigned it, as he said, and thereby basically destroyed it, and also including the pressure on European, French, German companies to not do business with Iran. I think right now, in preparing for the Trump administration and for the official legal end of the GCPOA, which is running out next year around this time, Europeans have a role again. And there's a discussion about snapback, which is a means of pressure on Iran, snapping back the UN sanctions on Iran. The Americans cannot do that because they are no longer part to the JCPOA. The Europeans can do it. And I think, as far as I know, I wasn't in the room, but in the discussions the European representatives had with the Iranian representative in Geneva 2 weeks ago or so, Europeans were very transparent and said, we want a deal. We will also support a US-Iranian deal if it comes. But if you're not going to play ball on the Iranian side, we would this time join the Americans to put more pressure on you, and we have the chance to get the snapback enacted and bring the sanctions back. At the same time, we are also, and we can be instrumental if after a deal between the Trump administration and Iran, sanctions have to be lifted for real, Iran has to be reintegrated into the region. I am very much in favor of any contacts the president-elect of the United States has with the Iranians. I would be in the Itamar Rabinovich school here to think that in the end, President Trump, in his second tenure, would rather have a deal with Iran than taking the United States into another Middle East war, which will not be short. I know that many policymakers who start wars or generals who advise them are telling the public, oh, that this will be a very short war. But it never happens this way. George W. Bush was convinced that the war on Iraq would be very short. American troops are still there. So that's one thing, I guess, that Donald Trump instinctively understands. He doesn't want these forever wars in the Middle East anymore. You can discuss the way he made an agreement with the Taliban, which then Joe Biden had to implement, or he made an agreement, or he gave orders to withdraw his troops from Syria, which no one implemented. But he does not want to bring American troops into another war in the Middle East. So that's a good starting point for the Europeans to use their diplomatic skills and experience and resources and try to work for an agreement with the Iranians.
Marc?
I think there is a real chance here, also because, I mean, it's not that I expect the Iranians to say we have been defeated. No one really does it. But they have. They don't have air defense anymore. More importantly, their regional clout, which everybody exaggerated. Maybe we became victims to both Iranian and Israeli propaganda. The Iranians were saying, we are so big, we can dominate everything. And the Israelis said, look, the Iranians are so big, they threaten everything. And we sort of believed it in the end. Now, they have been standing rather naked there, right? They have not only been unable to deter Israel, much more important, they have been unable to protect their proxies, which means that their image, their aura in the Middle East is gone. So I guess they will have some hard discussions in Tehran, and I hope, but I basically also expect, that they will decide for building their own country, because that is what Pezeshkian has been elected for, and that means making up with the Europeans and the Americans over their nuclear program.
Thank you. Marc, I would like to have your assessment and on the main issue of a possibility of Iran-Israel conflict, and also your assessment of if you think it's realistic to have a big bargain between Iran and the West. As you know, in 2005, the Iranians proposed to America, to W. Bush, a big bargain, but W. Bush refused. So what is your assessment?
Yeah, but I think the situation is very different today. If you take a few facts, first, Iran is closer to nuclear breakout than ever. That's very scary for several actors in the region, and first of all for Israel. Second fact, Iran leaders, the previous ones at least, have pledged for the destruction of Israel. Third fact, Israel is weaker probably than ever over the past decades. It had a few strategic pillars in its strategy. The first one was proxies. I think it's fair to say that Iran lost its proxy war. The second one was ballistic missiles and drones to target Israel and perhaps other countries. A good part of these ballistic missiles and drones were destroyed, or at least proved ineffective to do real harm to Israel. The next fact is that Israel and Trump want to get rid of Iran's nuclear program. The question is how. So I think that it's more likely today than it was 6 months ago that some kind of military operation may take place, but I agree with what Volker said. The Iranians know they are weak. I mean, they don't have any air defense anymore. And so either they are very ideologically determined to continue as they have been for the past 4 decades now, and the result will be at some point a tragedy, or they will negotiate. And the deal is also on the table. We don't know exactly the term of the deal, but there will most probably be a proposal. I think that for the moment, all the options are open, but I think that the likelihood of a military operation is now higher than it was a few months ago.
Mohammad, let's say that there is that the idea of Elon Musk going to see the Iranian ambassador was to prepare a big bargain. And let's assume then, if it's confirmed by the Senate, Marco Rubio will call Americans allies of the GCC and ask to you, the GCC, okay, what kind of conditions you would like to be fulfilled in this agreement between, in the big bargain agreement between America and Iran? What would you answer? Emirates, Saudis, and others.
I think we will easily fall in a trap if we recognize, or if we thought that this is the point of weakness of Iran, and we need to hit it now, put conditions, it's defeated, I think that would be a big mistake. I think that we've seen so far a lot of changes in Iranian behavior. And those changes are not because of a military weakness alone. It has to do with their own legitimacy, which is connected to their own economic realities. They've looked at the region, and their biggest foe used to be Saudi Arabia. Not because it's equivalent in size or power, but because they've seen themselves the leaders of the Shia Islam, when Saudi Arabia was the leader of Sunni Islam, and that's why. But now Saudi Arabia is not playing that game anymore. It's focused on geoeconomics. It's focused on a different type of revolution. It's an economic revolution. And Iran is left with that old ball in its hand, nobody else to play with. They have to be part of that. Now, if we wanted to say, that's good, this is the time, we hit Iran, let it destroy the regime, and then we become victorious, I think we will make a mistake. I think this is the time when we help Iran make the change and play according to the new games. And I think, we've heard Itamar talk about the two conditions for a grand bargain. I think the second condition is possibly already there. We don't have Iran using its proxies. And people say, no, it lost it because of Israel. Maybe. But also remember that Hezbollah agreed the demarcation of the marine borders for economic reasons, not because of military reasons. And actually, before the 7th of October, there were discussions on even an agreement, a demarcation of the land borders, which would have meant that there is a peace agreement between Lebanon and Israel. There is no contested borders, which means Hezbollah is not a resistance anymore. In my view, that is the right approach to do. And that means we have no problems now with Israel because we don't have a borders issue. Yes, we support the Palestinian case, but we are not in direct confrontation. This is what we need to do right now. A grand bargain, in my view, is far more possible. Not because the US can force it, because I think Iran needs it.
Great, thank you very much. Between I go to questions, I would like to speak for 2 minutes about Sudan. And there's this terrible conflict. Nobody cares in America about it. Few people care about it in Europe. I understand the Emirates are more on the side of MAT, of the Security Border Forces. Can the Emirates and Europe do something to stop this war in Sudan or not?
First of all, I don't think that the UAE is on the side of Houthi. The UAE had held good relationship with all of the different parties, including the previous Prime Minister, Hamdok. And its view is that we need the political element, not only the military elements. And it was working with all of them to, complete the transition period. For the UAE, they would lose from this, feud of this war because they've invested so much in Sudan, with both of them. And Sudan also is in the middle between Egypt and Ethiopia. Another, tension that needs to be taken. Sudan can bleed on Somalia, it can bleed on other. And we operate 5 ports in the Red Sea. It's not in our best interest that this conflict go on for 1 single day more. Okay. But what I see is that in all of the efforts, international efforts to bring the warring parties together, there was one party that never showed up. And we have to ask ourselves, why didn't Burhan show up? He didn't show up in Jeddah, he didn't show up in Kenya, he didn't show up in Geneva. So what does he want? What can Europe do? And I think we need to establish the rules again. Europe and the West has always said, we need to emphasize a rule-based order. Where are the rules over there? What are the rules? Have they changed? And if they changed, well, we need to send a notice to everyone that the rules have changed. These are the new rules. If they didn't change, which means the sanctity of human life, it's the impact of humanitarian aspects. It's that the conflicts, if they're, because this is not an existential conflict of identity. These are all Sudanese, they're all Sunni. It's a political, it's different than, this. So I think this is where Europe, and it hasn't been really forthcoming in that.
Just a quick question, Marc. Are you optimistic about Lebanon, another country? Do you think in January we'll have a new Lebanese president or not?
Well, at least we know approximately what must be done. And there's a framework of reference, and almost all the actors refer to Resolution 1701. Even the Israelis actually refer to Resolution 1701, and they say, okay, if it's properly applied, then that will be fine. And that will be, I think, the stress test for the Europeans, among others, because they have to prove that they can deliver on that, including in terms of money, because the Lebanese army needs funds, actually. It needs to be rebuilt. Again, that's state building, actually, in the making. And also in terms of military presence, I mentioned the UNIFIL blue helmets before. If you change the mandate and you make it more robust, perhaps this time it could or it might work. Again, let's try and be a bit optimistic. I wanted just to add one thing about Iran. I forgot to say it before, but when you look at the statements produced by Germany, France, and the UK over the past months, it's actually pretty sad. It just illustrates our powerlessness. Basically, it's statements that sounds like, we condemn Iran for enriching more and more and more, and we urge Iran to reverse. And then a few months later, you have the same kind of statements. So, I mean, how can we be better, more effective, more coherent? I mean, that's the open question. And I think that we should prepare for some kinds of scenarios. So on Iran, maybe a military operation, a limited one on nuclear facilities, not necessarily an open war, a big one, but a limited series of strikes. And I agree with you, war has its own grammar, and you know when it starts, you never know when it ends, but still. And the second scenario is a potential, possible annexation of at least part of the West Bank. And again, I say part because Trump made recent statement about his previous deal of the century. It was not the Palestinian state expected, but there was a Palestinian state. Jerusalem was not the capital. It was a series of different territories linked by bridges and tunnels. So obviously it was rejected by the Palestinians at the time, by the Israeli settlers as well. Now, what he said is, well, there was this plan, but there may be other options. So it means he does not rule out annexation. And if it happens, what will the European do? Produce another statement like the one I mentioned? Or can they be more robust, have more teeth?
Okay, thank you, Marc. I'm not sure that, our new High Representative in the European Union, High Representative for Foreign Affairs, know a lot about the Middle East, and I don't think that her priority would be the Middle East. She's, of course, totally focused on Ukraine, Russia. Now, is there any question? Oui, Ambassador?
Yeah, sort of a question, a bit of a remark, and I apologize. I mean, as an Israeli diplomat whose career was mostly focused on Europe, I have easily 40 or 45 years experience of European frustrations and complaints about its absence in our affairs. Some of them understandable, and to be honest, some of them well-deserved. I mean, the only significant event concerning the Israeli-Palestinian issue that happened in Europe was in a country that's not part of the EU, that's the Oslo process. I mean, jokes apart, it's understandable. If at any given moment it takes the EU 3 months to elaborate a policy, a position, and even then it doesn't necessarily represent all the countries, then you can't be surprised that things happen. The trains leave the station. On the other hand, and I'm saying this really in all honesty, there's no shame in being a second-tier player. You can contribute a lot, and I'll give you just an example from an area that I know very, very well over the last year, which is the hostage situation. There were some European countries, including France, to a great degree, Germany, but a few others, who have contributed significantly on that issue without actually sitting at the table of the negotiations. They contributed on a humanitarian aspect, but also diplomatic. So really, there's no shame. Sometimes, you know, that's what you can do. On the other hand, here we are discussing a situation where we're talking about something that is about to happen. So maybe this is the moment for the Europeans to think how they can weigh in, for example, on the Iran-Israel issue, both in Iran and in Washington, to make sure that in the choice between a weak Iran that is easy prey for an American-Israeli attack, or the weak Iran that is a negotiating partner of choice, the weights go towards the second option. Thank you.
Very good remark. I saw another hand. Anyway.
Yeah, thank you. Nicolas Pio from Tilt Capital. Actually, it's an expansion on this remark and a question to a diplomatically uneducated eye. It's striking to see how the European Commission is totally absent of your discussion. You just mentioned towards the end the High Representative. In the end, isn't this just an issue of the European states still trying to defend rather their own national influence rather than building a genuine European influence? And I would really like to understand from the UAE, what does the European Commission represent as an actor? Is it an actor or is it just not an actor?
Very good question. Mohammad, you answer.
Definitely an actor if they want to be. I mean, this is an act of will. If you want to be part of this, if you think that this, what happens in the region, is going to come to Europe, then you will have to act. If you think that Europe is insulated from all of this and it will not be touched, history have taught us otherwise, but then that's what you do. Honestly, it's a matter of will, whether they want to do this or not. I mean, the previous High Representative was involved in so many things. Yes, Europe has got an issue getting their act together, but that is not a lack of will. The new High Representative, I'm not quite sure.
Volker, you wanted to answer?
Look, I think both Marc and I here, as Europeans, we were rather clear on where the inhibitions are for Europe, not the inhibitions for France to play a French role, or for Germany to play a German role, or the Czech Republic to play a Czech role, or the Spaniards to play a Spanish role. But particularly on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, we do have our idiosyncrasies, national idiosyncrasies, which we will not easily overcome. So for Germany, it is impossible to do some things which is very easy for Ireland to do, for example, or for Spain, for not good historical reasons, but for bad historical reasons. We have this special relationship for Israel, which is not only a foreign policy obligation, it is very much part of our domestic politics. And if we don't understand that, of course, it is easy to say, why are the Europeans not united? We are united in the strategic goals. We want a two-state solution. No European would divert from that, but we are not united on the tactics, like how to vote in the General Assembly, or if we happen to be in the Security Council, And I think that has to be understood by our partners. On the other hand, and I'm grateful also for the question, is Europe not more than just the High Representative? Of course, it is the economic weight and the financial weight of Europe, and of course the Commission represents that much more than the High Representative. So let's speak about the issues of the future that are coming up, the regional integration. Renaud, at some point you said, did we miss a train? I think we shouldn't wait for trains or miss trains, we should build railways. I mean, that is what we can do and what we have been doing in the past, and there are partners for that. We didn't speak about Iraq, for example. I mean, we have yesterday we spoke about IMEC, which is a very interesting project to link India through the Gulf to Europe. And European companies and the European Commission and the European Global Gateway Project will have a role on that. There's also a Baghdad-Iraq Development Corridor project, which would link, again, Europe to the Gulf or the Gulf to Europe through Iraq and Turkey. And that's something, I mean, from a German tradition, I could say we are rather good in building railways to Baghdad. So we can start here again and make that modern and build these corridors. That is where, if you ask for the European Commission, where this weight will come in and should come in.
Thank you, Volker. The conclusion is yours now.
Yeah, we ran out of time just now, actually. So just 1 minute. I just want to say that I was in Israel a few days ago, actually, and I mentioned the 5 points that Josep Borrell, the High Representative, used in one of his latest speech before leaving, actually, his job. And he said, first, we have to support peace camps on each side. Second, we have to confront spoilers. Third, we have to stick to facts and fight disinformation. Fourth, we have to protect international law, including ICC decisions. 5, we have to make EU relevant. And when I said that, basically it was like raising the red flag. You know, the reaction was, well, but Borrell is pro-Palestinian, etc., etc. But the fact is that these 5 points have even become divisive within the EU. And so if we cannot even agree on things like supporting peace camps, confront spoilers, supporting international law, and so on, I don't know where we're heading to.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Ambassador Daniel Sheikh, for your very good remark. Yes, Europe is not yet a body to react to crisis very quickly. This was a very interesting point. Thank you very much. Thank you very much to the speakers. Thank you. Thank you.